Out of your vulnerabilities will come your strength. We are never so defenseless against suffering as when we love. The more perfect a person is on the outside, the more demons they have on the inside. Civilized society is perpetually menaced with disintegration through this primary hostility of men towards one another. We are what we are because we have been what we have been. Most people do not really want freedom because freedom involves responsibility, and most people are frightened of responsibility. Everyone has wishes, which he would not like to tell to others, which he does not want to admit, even to himself. The more the fruits of knowledge become accessible to men, the more widespread is the decline of religious belief. Immorality, no less than morality, has at all times found support in religion. Words and magic were in the beginning one and the same thing, and even today words retain much of their magical power. Beauty has no obvious use, nor is there any clear cultural necessity for it, yet civilization could not do without it. He does not believe that does not live according to his belief. We are never so vulnerable as when we love, and never so hopelessly unhappy as when we lose the object of our love. From error to error, one discovers the entire truth. In the depths of my heart, I can't help being convinced that my dear fellow men, with a few exceptions, are worthless. Men are strong so long as they represent a strong idea. They become powerless when they oppose it. A civilization which leaves so large a number of its participants unsatisfied and drives them into revolt neither has nor deserves the prospect of a lasting existence. One day, in retrospect, the years of struggle will strike you as the most beautiful. Just as no one can be forced into belief, so no one can be forced into unbelief. A man should not strive to eliminate his complexes, but to get into accord with them. They are legitimately what directs his conduct in the world. We have learned, for example, that the more virtuous a man is, the more severe is his superego, and that he blames himself for misfortunes for which he is clearly not responsible. Illusions commend themselves to us because they save us pain and allow us to enjoy pleasure instead. We must therefore accept it without complaint when they sometimes collide with a bit of reality against which they are dashed to pieces. The conscious mind may be compared to a fountain playing in the sun and falling back into the great subterranean pool of subconscious from which it rises. The voice of the intellect is a soft one, but it does not rest until it has gained a hearing. Ultimately, after endless rebuffs, it succeeds. This is one of the few points in which one may be optimistic about the future of mankind. The only person with whom you have to compare yourself is you in the past. The mind is like an iceberg. It floats with 1/7 of its bulk above water. The great question that has never been answered, and which I have not yet been able to answer, despite my 30 years of research into the feminine soul, is, what does a woman want? The interpretation of dreams is the royal road to a knowledge of the unconscious activities of the mind. Thought is action in rehearsal. He that has eyes to see and ears to hear may convince himself that no mortal can keep a secret. If his lips are silent, he chatters with his fingertips. Betrayal oozes out of him at every pore. Friendship is an art of keeping distance, while love is an art of intimacy. It is easy to show that the ego ideal answers to everything that is expected of the higher nature of man. As a substitute for a longing for the Father, it contains the germ from which all religions have evolved. The time comes when each of us has to give up as illusions the expectations which, in his youth, he pinned upon his fellow men, and when he may learn how much difficulty and pain has been added to his life by their ill will. In the small matters, trust the mind; in the large ones, the heart. A layman will no doubt find it hard to understand how pathological disorders of the body and mind can be eliminated by mere words. He will feel that he is being asked to believe in magic. Time spent with cats is never wasted. People do not really want freedom because freedom involves responsibility, and most people are frightened of responsibility. Just as a cautious businessman avoids investing all his capital in one concern, so wisdom would probably admonish us also not to anticipate all our happiness from one quarter alone. The first human who hurled an insult instead of a stone was the founder of civilization. Whoever possesses something that is at once valuable and fragile is afraid of other people's envy, insofar as he projects onto them the envy he would have felt in their place. Whoever loves becomes humble. Those who love have, so to speak, pawned a part of their narcissism. The ego refuses to be distressed by the provocations of reality, to let itself be compelled to suffer. It insists that it cannot be affected by the traumas of the external world. It shows, in fact, that such traumas are no more than occasions for it to gain pleasure. Experience teaches that for most people, there is a limit beyond which their constitution cannot comply with the demands of civilization. All who wish to reach a higher standard than their constitution will allow fall victims to neurosis. It would have been better for them if they could have remained less perfect. The ego is not master in its own house. The individual does actually carry on a double existence, one designed to serve his own purposes and another as a link in a chain in which he serves against, or at any rate without, any volition of his own. Neurotics complain of their illness, but they make the most of it, and when it comes to taking it away from them, they will defend it like a lioness her young. Unexpressed emotions will never die. They are buried alive and will come forth later in uglier ways. Love and work, work and love, that's all there is. Properly speaking, the unconscious is the real psychic. Its inner nature is just as unknown to us as the reality of the external world, and it is just as imperfectly reported to us through the data of consciousness as is the external world through the indications of our sensory organs. A belligerent state permits itself every such misdeed, every such act of violence, as would disgrace the individual. Public self is a conditioned construct of the inner psychological self. The virtuous man contents himself with dreaming that which the wicked man does in actual life. It is impossible to escape the impression that people commonly use false standards of measurement, that they seek power, success, and wealth for themselves and admire them in others, and that they underestimate what is of true value in life. It is that we are never so defenseless against suffering as when we love, never so helplessly unhappy as when we have lost our loved object or its love. What is common in all these dreams is obvious. They completely satisfy wishes excited during the day which remain unrealized. They are simply and undisguisedly realizations of wishes. Suffering comes from three quarters: from our own body, which is destined to decay and dissolution, and cannot even dispense with anxiety and pain as danger signals; from the outer world, which can rage against us with the most powerful and pitiless forces of destruction; and finally, from our relations with other men. When making a decision of minor importance, I have always found it advantageous to consider all the pros and cons. In vital matters, however, such as the choice of a mate or a profession, the decision should come from the unconscious, from somewhere within ourselves. In the important decisions of personal life, we should be governed, I think, by the deep inner needs of our nature. As regards intellectual work, it remains a fact indeed that great decisions in the realm of thought and momentous discoveries and solutions of problems are only possible to an individual working in solitude. Life is impoverished. It loses in interest. When the highest stake in the game of living, life itself, may not be risked, it becomes as shallow and empty as, let us say, an American flirtation. We are so constituted that we can gain intense pleasure only from the contrast, and only very little from the condition itself. Life, as we find it, is too hard for us. It brings us too many pains, disappointments, and impossible tasks. In order to bear it, we cannot dispense with palliative measures. There are perhaps three such measures: powerful deflections, which cause us to make light of our misery; substitutive satisfactions, which diminish it; and intoxicating substances, which make us insensible to it. The behavior of a human being in sexual matters is often a prototype for the whole of his other modes of reaction in life. Instinct of love toward an object demands a mastery to obtain it, and if a person feels they can't control the object or feel threatened by it, they act negatively toward it. In so doing, the idea forces itself upon him that religion is comparable to a childhood neurosis, and he is optimistic enough to suppose that mankind will surmount this neurotic phase, just as so many children grow out of their similar neurosis. Words have a magical power. They can bring either the greatest happiness or deepest despair. They can transfer knowledge from teacher to student. Words enable the orator to sway his audience and dictate its decisions. Words are capable of arousing the strongest emotions and prompting all men's actions. The patient cannot remember the whole of what is repressed in him, and what he cannot remember may be precisely the essential part of it. He is obliged to repeat the repressed material as a contemporary experience, instead of remembering it as something in the past. Human beings are funny. They long to be with the person they love, but refuse to admit openly. Some are afraid to show even the slightest sign of affection because of fear. Fear that their feelings may not be recognized, or even worse, returned. But one thing about human beings puzzles me the most is their conscious effort to be connected with the object of their affection, even if it kills them slowly within. Human life should not be considered as the proper material for wild experiments. When a man has once brought himself to accept, uncritically, all the absurdities that religious doctrines put before him, and even to overlook the contradictions between them, we need not be greatly surprised at the weakness of his intellect. The scope of one's personality is defined by the magnitude of that problem which is capable of driving a person out of his wits. Who lacks sex speaks about sex. Hungry talks about food, a person who has no money. About money, and our oligarchs and bankers talk about morality. Rather than living our lives, we are lived by unknown and uncontrollable forces.